This is Stefan Schmidt for InsiderIowa.com. This week, the war in Iraq officially ended, for the U.S. anyway. The United States pulled down its Iraq operations flag. The flag was wrapped in camouflage, which is the traditional way that the military retires its combat ensign from an field of operation. The Vice President of the United States went to Iraq, and it was a relatively quiet ceremony. There wasn't a lot of fanfare, not a lot of parades. There was no a kind of victory moment where the U.S. Or the President of the United States said mission accomplished. That did not happen. There's a lot of question as to whether the United States should have terminated its operations in Iraq the way that it has, closing most of its bases and essentially taking its equipment and troops back home. Republicans, especially Senator John McCain, have been very critical of President Obama, saying that the U.S. has essentially pulled out of a Middle Eastern country where the U.S. should be playing a role going forward. Senator McCain was once asked during the presidential debates when he was running for president how long he thought the United States would have to be involved in Iraq, and his answer was maybe 100 years. I remember at the time a lot of people gasped and were surprised and shocked that he would say that, but some people think that the United States needed to stay in Iraq for a much longer period of time to provide backup for the government and to essentially conduct sort of lower-keyed military and surveillance operations to counteract the power of Iran, which is right next door. And so even though most Americans, the polls show that most Americans really thought it was time to wind down the war and to bring American troops home and end the injuries, the deaths, and the tremendous cost of that war, some still feel that the U.S. has weakened its position in the Middle East and its position next to Iran, which remains a nuclear threat and remains a national security concern. I think President Obama fulfilled his campaign promise. He fulfilled it a little bit later than his supporters and those who voted for him in 2008 would have liked. But I think it was appropriate to do it slowly, to not do it in haste, to give the Iraqis a chance to build their military and police forces so that they have a reasonable chance of creating some stability in the country. And I think that it will help the United States in the Middle East because, after all, American land forces occupying a Muslim country has been a divisive issue, has not been popular. People in the Middle Eastern countries are very uncomfortable about it, and it has created to some extent some anti-Americanism, which may now be less because the U.S. is no longer, at least in one of those countries. When the U.S. will be able to do the same in Afghanistan is the next question. Afghanistan is a very tricky situation. Pakistan is there next to Afghanistan and is a great national security concern for the U.S. The stability of Afghanistan itself is in question, and I think the U.S. is beginning to withdraw forces. We know that. But I think we will walk more cautiously and carefully because Afghanistan is still a pretty explosive place. This was a fairly important moment that went by without the kind of fanfare that you'd expect and without a lot of breastfeeding and chauvinism and so on. Patriots and people who believe that the United States, should show off its strength and so on, were upset with President Obama for not glorifying more. But on the other hand, I think that it was an appropriate way of winding up an operation that is now almost 9 years old and that needed to be essentially put to rest. This is Stefan Schmidt for InsiderIowa.com.